Barnaby Jones will return next Thursday night at 10, 9 Central and Mountain on most of these stations.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I remember when The Dark Knight Returns came out. I remember when Watchmen came out. So, of course, I remember when Kingdom Come came out.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Man, I don't hate to break it to everybody, but the party started backstage before we started recording. I'm happy to welcome Jeremy Adams to Word Balloon. It's really nice to meet you, man. Welcome.
It's wonderful to meet you, especially because now I know we have a love of things like Angel. So, you know, if you like Farscape, we're best friends. That's all I know.
I love Dude,
I'm a nut.
Bendis's wife and I are like, Brian, Farscape is he's like, puppets.
Oh, like, no.
Oh my God.
Just like, no. I became so I discovered Farscape because I was at Comic-Con, and I think it was right after it had got canceled. And there was a bunch of people that loved Farscape and trying to get it renewed, and they were talking so much crap about how great Farscape was. And I was like, all right, hold on. And I just slowly, I was producing DVDs at the time, and I would go to Amoeba Records, fish in their like DVD pile for like the people that put it out only put like two episodes or 4 episodes. And
sure.
Yeah, I piecemealed my way through it, and I was obsessed. They did stuff in that series I'd never seen anybody do. And then when those guys showed up on Stargate, I was still like, no, they need to go back. Anyways, we're not talking about TV.
No, but you've been very kind and said you watch Word Balloon, so you know how this place operates. We'll talk about the books, and then we get into Farscape or Angel or whatever the fuck you want to talk about as far as shit we love, because I'm all about that. And you know what's awesome is I'm sure you've experienced possibly doing other podcasts and stuff. The great thing is, and then thankfully, some listener or viewer is going to meet you at a convention and go, I like Farscape. Right. I like Angel. And that really means it's like, hey, man, because, I always tell people, I'm like, no, that's great. Because then they got something else to talk about beyond the obvious. So, no, very cool.
Well, because I'm like just a huge fan. Like, I'm just a huge fan that got this opportunity. And like, it's not lost on me. And in fact, sometimes I'm the Chris Farley in the SNL, I'm just constantly... Like, if you ever talk to Kevin McGuire, I'm just badgering him at conventions. Like, the only reason I'm going to conventions is just be like, hey, remember that time you drew that thing and you did this? And it's just, I know the people next to me are just like, oh, gosh, shut up.
Him and Jam DeMatteis did a joint interview with me during COVID. Oh. And since then, I'm like, Kev, you got to come back. And he's like, I don't really like doing podcasts. I'm like, all right. I mean, him, Jimmy Chung is like that. A couple people, Kurt Busiek, and they're very nice people, and they're not rude when they turn you down.
Right.
But I'm like, all right, I'm not going to hassle you anymore. If that's not what you want to do, I'm happy just to read your stuff or look at your art, and that's totally fine. Don't worry about it.
Obviously, Kevin's like one of my favorite artists of all time because JLI was such a huge impact. But JM is not just one of my favorite writers, but like the guy is still just nailing it. And to have a career that like spans that much time and also still working in animation, still working in film and television, it's like, and he's just so zen about it, right? Like everything, I'm just like, I want to be like that guy.
Well, you are like that guy, and we're going to get into animation work and comics and everything that you're doing. I completely agree. I want to acknowledge some of the people that are already saying hello. Guys like Jimmy Zub saying hello. Very nice. My buddy Pete Beiser watching. He says, I love when the Word Balloon conversations go off track into TV and whatnot. Tom King probably talks as much about Columbo as he does comics here. Totally true. God, yes, and Tamir's making fun of you and going, yeah, doing a Chris Farley. Remember when you were the Beatles? That was awesome. Absolutely, man. So,
and Jim, I don't know if you've been reading Jim's Conan. It's like Conan the Barbarian. Unbelievable.
Well, again, another book that I loved back in the day. Jimmy was just on like a week or two ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I'm one of the sweetest guys in the business.
Yeah.
I'm so happy for him, and I'm so happy that because, as you know, with some of the properties you've worked on and stuff, you know, we could be snobs. Comic fans could be snobs about, sorry, I don't think so. You're not doing it right. And Jimmy has been embraced by the current Conan readers and the old timers, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's threading the needle in a way that like is so incredibly hard, and it's fun to see when people do that. But you're right. Like, I'm a huge snob. I say it all the time. Like, it could be the best story in the world, but I always talk about this. Is like, but if I open it up and I don't like the way it looks, you know, I'll close it. It's a visual medium. I mean, and the artists. I'm so lucky to work with. You know, Zermanico right now is just, and I could be mispronouncing it, but like he's on Green Lantern. He's unreal, and Will Grant's unreal. I'm very lucky.
There are so many comments before we get started with you and I just want to acknowledge everybody that's already chiming in. Jolly is saying hello. Dennis is saying loving Jeremy's work. I was that guy when he was announced on The Flash. Like, who? That's probably my favorite Flash run ever. We're going to talk about The Flash. He says he's up there with Wade and Jeff Johns. His Green Lantern is fantastic. Don't worry, we're going to get into that. Dylan, hello. Don't know how long I can stay, but I just want to say Jeremy's the best new writer I've encountered. The Annie Monitor wrestling moment from your Flash is a scene I constantly revisit. Excellent. Very cool. Silhouette says, love your work, Jeremy. Anna, hello, Anna. Always happy when it's not just the boys club and women are there as well. Loving a GL run. As the world's biggest Sinestro fan, will we see more Ode in the Big Pink in your run? I love the way you've written him so far. I don't know what the OD is, buddy. Tell me.
The OD, I'm trying to think myself.
Or all will we see more? I don't know. Anna, if you're still with us, make sure you clarify. Yeah. We'll get back to it. We may as well start with Green Lantern. Although, and Jeremy, because I want to talk about what you were doing prior to comics and everything. Let's start with prior to comics. What were you doing? How'd you break in?
So I moved to Los Angeles long time ago and worked as an assistant for a long time until Jim Krieg, who's a fantastic writer, producer, got me a job on Green Lantern, the animated series. That was my first credit ever, and first time meeting like Bruce Timm, who I've worked with subsequently. And then it was just, you know, as entertainment jobs go, it's like, oh, I've got a job. Now I have 2 years of not getting a job, but now I've got a job. And so at one point I started getting a lot of work at Warner Brothers with Justice League Action. And then I started doing Lego stuff. There was a movie, a straight to DVD movie called DC Superhero Girls. It was like called Brain Drain. And Jim calls me up and he says, hey, I was going to give this to someone else, which I'm like, oh, thanks. And he goes, but you're the fastest writer I've ever met. And honestly, that's kind of my claim to fame. And in some ways, it's gotten people out of the fire quite a bit. So I started a relationship with Lego, and from there, things kind of snowballed. And I've done a ton of Lego shows and Lego movies and whatever, but I've done a bunch of animated Warner Brothers stuff. I did a cool Batman movie with Bruce Timm called Batman Sold the Dragon. And
great movie. Excellent movie, man.
Yeah, and the Super Sons movie, and then I did all these Mortal Kombat movies. And then what had happened was, and I'm leading up to how we got into comics, but what had happened was I had done I'd been pitching a Scooby-Doo Supernatural crossover at Warner Brothers Animation, who said, that's the stupidest idea that I've ever, and I was like, no, it's great. What are you talking about? And one of my friends ended up becoming the showrunner. He had been on Supernatural since season 4. And Jim's like, we should call him up and ask him if he wanted to do an episode. We called him up. I've never had anything like this happen where it all got greenlit within like a half an hour. And every step of the way, Jim and I kept thinking they're going to stop us from doing this because it's all about the boys, the Supernatural boys getting sucked into a Scooby-Doo cartoon. And it's a straight Scooby-Doo cartoon, except that these boys are very self-aware. So they're a little more adult and like, you know, Dean's hitting on Daphne, and Daphne's just like oblivious, completely oblivious. But it just gets darker and darker and more violent. And we just kept thinking, there's no way they're going to let us do it. And we had to write it a year in advance. And sure enough, they let us do it. The note sessions were like, hey, on page 15, that was amazing. We're like, okay, like it was the weirdest experience, but it was huge. And after that, they asked me to come work on the show. And I was supposed to go on season 14, but because they were going to have a spinoff show, and that didn't happen. So I ended up coming on the last season, and they said, we don't want you to do with anything with the overarching arc. We just want you to come up with weird ideas. I'm like, great, here's 10 weird ideas. And they were like, no, those are too weird. So that's when I did the Christian Kane idea. I was like, let's do Roadhouse with Christian Kane, And they're like, sure. And then around that time, I get a call from Warner Brothers or from DC, and they say, and by the way, now I'm going to go back a second. Is my dad drew some comics growing up.
Okay.
DC books, like a couple issues, and he'd drawn some Captain Atom in the 80s. I didn't know that for a long time, but I knew he drew some comics. But we're pretty estranged, and it was always something I loved, and it was always kind of a safe place that we could talk about. And I've always been chasing it, and just always doing it backwards, going from film and television into comics. So what happened was I get a call from DC and says, hey, your name's on a list. Dan DiDio has he wants to get a bunch of animation writers from Warner Brothers Animation to come in and work on this thing called 5G. And so sure. With Josie Campbell and Tim Sheridan, who's a good friend of mine, and a bunch of people I know. And they said, they give us the whole spiel. And so I started pitching. I thought, this is it. I'm finally close. This is going to happen. And then Dan got let go. I was like, oh no, I was so close. But my name was still on a list. And the editor at the time, Mike Cotton, called me and he said, hey, would you want to do a backup on something? Do a DC 1 million Black Adam backup? I'm like, yeah, would I? This is the dream. And I had no idea what I'm doing. He sent me a Jeff Johns script to kind of look at. And I'm like, okay. And I'm trying to figure it out. And if you read it, it's just unbelievably wordy. And at the same time, I had just gotten another backup with that whole, like what 5G became future state in the Superman Worlds at War. It was a backup for Black Racer. That's weirdly, I didn't even know Philip Kennedy Johnson, but I'm like, oh, I'm doing backup. So I did those. And I don't know if they're good. I just know that, I took notes and I turned it in on time. And the next thing I know, I get a call and they say, hey, do you have any ideas for The Flash? And I said, I am a nerd of a certain age. I have an idea for everything, And I said, well, what if we did this quantum leap thing? And they're like, yeah, it's better than what we got. The Flash is yours. And that was how quick it went. It was like, The Flash is yours. No one knew who I was.
Nope.
And Warner Brothers is an absolute upheaval. I definitely was not the first person they offered it to.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. And so I just dove in, and then it's like you let me put my foot in the door, and now I'm never gonna leave, And then I just started like living the dream, man. Really, it was crazy. By the time that Kevin Maguire did a 10-page segment of one of the issues, and I remember thinking, I remember very clearly thinking, like, even if they fire me, I won. I absolutely won. There's nothing they can take away. Kevin Maguire drew 10 pages. It's it. I did it. I was so thrilled. So thrilled.
So a lot to unpack. First of all, I want to ask Scooby Natural, is it streaming on Max?
If Supernatural's streaming, Supernatural was streaming on Netflix. So I don't know. It's one of those in perpetuity is streaming on something.
But is the Scooby animated crossover thing?
It should be.
So was that an episode of Supernatural, or was it a Scooby-Doo movie?
No, it was an episode of Supernatural.
Oh, awesome!
They hired me to do a sequel, and they paid me for it and everything. I wrote it, but that was supposed to be a Scooby movie that was played a straight Scooby movie. But the Scooby Natural, yeah, it became one of the best revered episodes, and they premiered it at the Paley Fest. So you got to understand, in the animation world, I've never experienced this amount of pomp and circumstance. And Jim and I and this executive there, we went to the Kodak Theater. That's where they held it, where they hold the Oscar. And it's packed. Yes. And there's the Scooby Mobile, the Mystery Machine, and Baby in the parking lot. And I'm like, this is intense. And we sit down, and Jim and I just keep looking at each other the entire time because they premiered it there during the thing, and people are howling. They're laughing over the jokes, and we are just like, this is crazy. And afterwards, I had met the boys previously at San Diego Comic-Con. I think it was our mutual friend Eric Carrasco got me, like, snuck us into the Warner Brothers party, if I'm recalling, there with the animation director named Spike Brandt. And I see Jared Padalecki and Jensen Ackles come in, and they have like bodyguards and stuff, and they're super tall. They're both super tall,
really?
And obscenely good looking. And I'm like, I got to get close to them and, like, you know, say hi, and like, and so I get close, and you see this bodyguard ready to, like, you know, stiff arm me. And I go, hi, my name's Jeremy. I'm one of the writers on Scooby Natural. And suddenly, Jensen, come here. Like, you know, and they were so nice. And so afterward of the Paley Fest, my wife's with me. My wife hasn't seen the show. And I just remember her seeing them, and absolutely the most, you know, it was so brutal because she was like, hi. Like,
sure.
There's nothing you can do.
Oh, come on. They're beautiful men, man. Good Lord.
So we have this picture, and it's like two troll people and all these beautiful people, you know. And but it was unbelievable. And even when they did the voiceover, and Jim was immediately like, you gotta, I hope we can go up to Vancouver for the live actions. He was already planting the seed. So they let us go in the very last scene when Dean says Scooby-Dooby-Doo, and they iris out on him. You can see us over his shoulder just in the rain of Vancouver with a super fan that was there. It was hilarious. It was probably one of the best experiences I've had making something.
That's amazing, man, because truly now, and I'll even confess, everybody, I really came to Supernatural very late. I absolutely respected the length of. I'm like, well, something good must be going on because look how long this goddamn thing's been on TV. And Jensen Ackles, I really liked him on Smallville when he was Lana's boyfriend. Yep. And then he, you know, and no disrespect. And again, this is how stupid I am. I can't remember the other guy's name, so please tell me.
Padalecki. Yeah, he was in Gilmore Girls. And Jensen was in Dark Angel with Jessica Alba. That's how
I didn't remember that. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And of course, my God, Jensen so perfectly cast as Soldier Boy in The Boys. And I love it. And it is so, and I tell my friends who aren't into The Boys, I'm like, no, man. This guy's like dirty Captain America. Yeah. And I'm like, you're going to die if you like Captain America. You're just going to love what he's doing with this approximation of Cap. It's so great. So no, I love everything. And I loved, as I was telling you, I got to meet Ben Edlund, and I did make sure I saw that one parallel universe episode of Supernatural where they're in the show. Yeah. And just that look on Eccles' face when he's trying to kind of, all right, I got to pretend, but I'm really uncomfortable about what I'm doing. I mean, it was just so many levels of acting, comedy going on.
So good. He does the voice for Batman and then all the new animated movies. So, like, he did A Long Halloween and stuff. And and just working with him a little bit, my esteem for him as a professional is so high, and he's so great. And him and Padalecki, I just have way too much respect for those guys. But yeah, he's the type of guy that you're like, he should be. I mean, he's a huge star, but you're like, but he should be a super hit. Like you're like bigger. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. No, I'm so with you, man. And by the way, our other Eric friend who worked on Justice League Action with you, Carrasco. He when I heard about Justice League Action, and then when I finally saw it, and I had a chance to talk to Eric about it, I had a chance to talk to Paul Dini about it, and man, that show, I really feel for you guys because how you guys packed in so much story And after, if you take away the intro
Yeah.
of the show, there were like 10-minute scripts, 9-minute scripts.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And
Yeah.
so much story. And I'm like, okay, because I'm like, all right, a half hour. And certainly I was used to all those years of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. That I'm like, all right, you can fill a half hour and still tell a hell of a story. But my God, at Justice League Action, it's like, these are great. It was so great to see Space Cabbie in the show. Again, man, I love my reprints.
Yeah.
And as a kid was reading reprints of Space Cabbie and all that stuff. I'm like, yes, please. My God, this is amazing.
It was so much fun. And it was like the second time that Cartoon Network kind of like screwed us. Like it was like Green Lantern the Animated Series and Young Justice at the time, like so early, and it was immediately cut off the knees. And then Justice League Action, we were so vibing. What happened was Jim, who worked with Alan Burnett on those, one day he goes, "Hey, we're going to Lake Arrowhead," and I thought it was going to be like just a get together, and it was like me and Alan Burnett and John Callan and Patrick Rieger and a couple of the writers, and we get up and we're up there on a boat, and then he says, "Let's go for a little hike, and then you guys will pitch us your stories." And I'm going, "We're here to pitch story." I was the only one that didn't get the memo. And so he parked the boat on a beach, and I'm like, thank goodness I have been a superhero nerd my entire life, because I was able to pull so many things. And my favorite, I had one called Forget Me Not that was really funny, and then the other one that I really liked was a Mr. Miracle one that I did. And working with Alan Burnett and just, he's just an expert at everything. And
great, brilliant.
He had evolved as a writer in a way that we all just were mesmerized, where he would take people would be so mad at him for something he wrote, and he would be giggling and just like having so much fun with it. And we're just like, how can we be like that? How can we not like let it just roll off our back, But
I hear you, man. No, I had the chance to talk to him when he was doing the latest adaptation of the animated series. That was a digital first, and then they were printing them.
Yes.
And oh my God, I had so much, because again, just like you, man, I'm a massive fan of the 90s show.
Yeah.
And a brilliant Batman writer was so, in fact, I was talking about it. There's a good excuse for me to, rerun it sooner than later in the days ahead. But 5G, and if you're not able to talk about it, hopefully maybe you were able to incorporate some of your ideas in some of the books that were published. Are you able to tell me anything about it?
It was crazy. It was like, if you met Dan DiDio.
Oh, I know Dan very well. Yeah.
He's writing Defenders of the Earth for Mad Cave right now. So we had a signing with Sam Jones at Comic-Con, which is super fun. And Dan's the sweetest guy and high energy. And this is the thing. This is what's so weird for me as a fan, because I would go to Comic-Con every year and I would be in the audience in that DC panel, like every year. There's a picture of all the audience with the Court of Owls mask. I'm one of those. I have the Court of Owls mask right there. Like, I'm like a nut. And he was always, everybody needs a music man. Everybody needs that guy that's like, oh, we got Bill, right? Like, hold on at $2.99, or he's ripping off shirts and all this stuff. And so we're in this room and he's doing exactly that. And he's like, this is called 5G. Everything that's happened in the continuity of DC Comics has happened. And he had this map and it showed everything. And, Alfred was going to be killed. Like, some of the stuff has all been incorporated organically. Some of it.
Sure.
Some of it was just like, okay, Batman's not Batman. Like, there's a new Green Lantern coming out that is very reminiscent from some of the art I had seen from that era with like the shepherd's hook and the lantern stuff. And so we pitched stuff. What's interesting is I had pitched a Green Lantern. What did I pitch? I had pitched a Green Lantern story where Hal, John, and Guy were Earth was quarantined, and they were on Earth, and basically they had one ring between them. And like a cop show, every issue would be them trading off the ring, and and taking their next shift or whatever it was. So when they took me off of Flash, Sadness. And then they offered me Green Lantern at the same time. I was like, I don't know. And then I thought about it, and it was Jeff Johns who really kind of like pumped me up about it. And then I was like, oh, I could use this and we could do this. And Paul, my editor, was like, we want him to be more Earth centric. I was like, yeah, but there's got to be a reason. And so it all kind of, some of that 5G stuff incorporated into that. But I think a lot of the 5G stuff got, I think it was it was a really like swing for the fences idea. But I think a lot of that got distilled into Future State. And,
okay, sure.
And that, some people followed the thread of Future State. Like my friend Tim Sheridan, like he followed his thread in Titans Academy. And then there were some people that didn't. Like Brandon Vietti, who's an amazing writer too, he had written written the Flash Future State. And there's a whole thing about Wally being infected by famine and stuff. And I was like, my thing was I got the Flash and I was like, I would tell people, no one knew who I was. I was like, nothing bad's going to happen to Wally. Like I was like, we're done, but he's the human pinata. And I feel like it worked because I have people that will tweet me being like, oh, screw Jeremy. Nothing ever happens to Wally. He's just always happy and good. And I'm like, if that's what you think, then I did my job. If you think Wally has only been a character that nothing bad has happened to.
Yeah, listen, I love Dan, and Dan has always been good to me. And it literally, my first encounter with Dan was Fletcher and Jan Robinson back in the day when they were still working for DC. They heard me imitating Dan at a convention, and the next year they're like, "You're that guy that does Dan. Have you done it again?" I said no, and like, you got to do it. And essentially, it's like Jackie Mason, the old comedian. All right, how you doing? All right, this is good. All right,
my God.
And he really, God bless him, and took it in the kindness I meant by it, and it wasn't. He didn't like, all right, fuck you. I don't want to fuck you. So he was great. So he was on my side, and truly, I'm happy for Dan. I'm glad that the burden of running DC is gone. But like you were saying about DC Nation, hey man, Dan studied at the feet of Marvel and Stan Lee and creating community. Yeah. And when he became executive editor, I mean, and forgive me, everybody, if you're watching and you know this, or you're listening and you know this, but for the younger viewers and listeners that don't remember back in the early 2000s, the ancient times, that was a big move to really help, like, kind of kick the DC community in the ass as far as fans go. And like, hey, no, we like this stuff and we're excited about what we're doing and we want you to be excited. It worked. I mean, this is years before I started the podcast, and I'm like, all right, I love this shit.
Countdown to Infinite Crisis, I was so in the bag. Like, I mean, it was just like so in the bag.
Sure.
All those things. He always kept it interesting. And I feel like when that happens, in parallel, Marvel was at the heights of its power too.
Yes.
Prada, I met him at the convention, and I was just fanboying. I was like, that run of Civil War to Secret Invasion of World War Hulk, I lost my mind. I was like, this is so seamless. It was a way to like change the universe and then reboot the universe in such an organic way.
Yes.
It's terrible.
No, and you're so right about Wally as well, and then I was going to say it about Dan because it seemed like Wally and Dick Grayson were like his two targets of all right, whatever, and it's like, no, man, and again, I get it. I mean, I'm older than that, 10 years younger than me, maybe 15 years younger generation that grew up with the Titans and literally grew up with them. Yeah. And started as teenagers. And then by the time of Wolfman and Perez, they were in their 20s. And we're like, oh, no, this is cool. Actually, I guess I was in my 20s too, but later 20s when they were at their height in the 80s. So, no, I get it. And by the way, the Green Lantern series, I understood why it was canceled. I'm assuming it was because it was really there to sell the toys, and the toys didn't really sell. That's what I had always heard. From other friends in animation and everything, that it's like, no, it's a brilliant, again, this is what I love. And it was years before now Warner Brothers understands the value of the adult audience. And I know too, the same with the Justice League cartoon. I mean, this is 20 years ago. I got to do the math. So I was in my 30s, and it's like, I'm telling college friends, no, you got to watch Justice League because it's a Y7 show. Yeah. But like, they're not playing the 7-year-olds, man. They are telling they're safe stories, but they're adult stories.
Yeah.
And my roommate in college, he and I are watching it, and his wife walks in. She's like, "Why are you watching a cartoon?"
That's hilarious.
Like, okay, listen, I know it's a cartoon, but it's really smart. And I don't know, man. I've loved these characters since the 70s and the Super Friends, and this is like amazing. And I'm like, yeah,
it's so smart. And what was so interesting to me, because the Justice League Unlimited is unbelievable. And then they pivoted and they did Batman Brave and the Bold. And I remember, like, I'm not watching that. And then you watch it and you're like, this is so great. You know, it's like so good. And then they do Justice League Action, and that's so good. And actually, the common thread for me is Justice League Unlimited, or Batman Brave and the Bold, I should say, and Justice League Action. I remember being in the sound booth, and Dietrich Bader is voicing, Batman, but he also voices Booster Gold. And there was a moment where all the writers are sitting there, and then suddenly we hear him be Booster Gold. And you could see all of us looking at each other like, who's going to get the most Booster Gold scripts in by tomorrow? Like, he was so good. He was so good. But yeah, I agree with you. They're sophisticated. They're interesting. They can be sad. They can be poignant. Speaking of, Eric Roscoe, like, he did such a soul sequel to that with Fatal Five. If you ever got to see Fatal
Yes, of course. Absolutely. That's when we talked. Yeah, that's when Eric was on.
And it's like that type of, there's just but see, one of my favorite creative endeavors is when I did the Batman movie with Bruce. And I remember it was Jim Krieg and me, and he said, hey, I'd worked with Bruce, just like he couldn't pick me out of a lineup, and he said, Bruce will probably fire you or whatever, but just, do it. And then Bruce and I got along great. And it was like, but this is the thing, I still have his scripts, his notes, and he would draw like the most like eyeballs rolling. When he didn't like something, he let you know. And
wow, funny.
Like him or Alan Burnett, or people that are wanting to take it a step above. And the other thing is, people don't understand these shows and movies, they are so low budget. They are so low. It's like Roger Corman low budget. So being able to write something around those conditions is a huge feat. And it's been to learn from those guys. And I don't think I've mastered it, but it's been really fun to try. And the Justice League stuff and all the animation stuff, just they hit on all cylinders all the time.
Are you still writing animation alongside the comics?
I am writing animation. I'm actually running a Lego show right now. They asked me to come in on the third season of a show, and I'm finishing up the fourth season. And that's been really fun, having a team of writers and heading that room. And then I do have a DTV, but I got a emergency alert, which is about the scariest thing in the world.
Okay. Is it an Amber Alert or something?
Amber Alerts, yeah. But yeah, I have a DTV that I've written. I wrote a while ago that I believe will come out at some point. Monkey Kid, yes, Monkey Kid.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Lego Monster, Monkey Kid. That show's fun. Yeah. That's excellent to hear. And well, before we get to the current stuff, and a couple of people have asked about what's coming. I'm assuming with DC All In, are you taking over World's Finest?
No, I'm not taking over World's Finest, but I do have a one shot that they asked me. I am the Mikey Likes It of comic books. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you want to? I go, yes. And before they even tell me what it is. And that happened. Like Josh Williamson was like, hey, do you want? Yes. I was like, I'm doing that. And with this one, I don't even know. At this point, I don't even know who asked me, hey, do you want to do a World's Finest with Green Arrow and Green Lantern? I'm like, heck yes. And so the first major part is Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And then the second part is Green Lantern and the Flash, Barry Allen, and Deathstroke's involved. And it's it's really fun. And like I said, I'm desperate to try my hand at little things. So World's Finest, I'm not taking it over. And I have a penguin, a little short in a penguin thing, which is really creepy. And then I've got an announcement at New York Comic Con, which will be fun.
Okay.
And then we've got this great Philip Kennedy Johnson and I. So I met him. I think I met him in New York, and we started talking. I love that guy. Love him. And
one of my guys, absolutely, man.
So great. And we just started chatting. We started talking about Green Lantern because he was doing John Stewart. And we kept thinking about how can we cross this over? How can we cross this over? So we have this Green Lantern Civil Corps special that is going to be basically Absolute Power is ended. The Civil War special is going to be the bridge between Absolute Power and the kind of end arc of what I've been doing for 12 issues now. And it's Philip and it's where we tie in Philip's stuff into what I'm doing with Hal's stuff and then go forward into the Green Lantern book. And I got to tell you, it's absolutely insane. Salvador LaRocca does the art. It's crazy. And then we move right into Zermanico, and it just gets crazier and crazier to the point that I'm just like, this is nuts. I can't believe they're letting me do this. This is nuts. Like every page is crazy. So I'm excited.
That's great, man. Well, also, my God, and I really loved your tie-in to Absolute Power.
Thank
in
you.
Yeah. You know, so yeah, that was terrific. And no, really, what you've been doing on the Lantern book has just been great.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
You've got to read. I don't know if you read any of the Flash book, but you got to read the Kevin Maguire one, where he quantum leaps into the first Flash being inducted into the Legion of Doom, like the Super Friends Legion of Doom.
Of course.
It's so.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great, man. No, I'll look for that. That's fantastic. I also, and it's funny because I talked to Mark during the beginning issues of Absolute Power, and I love that Mark brought back Airwave, because I remember in the 70s when it was the backup in Action Comics,
right?
And I totally forgot until I got to look at 4, and I won't spoil everybody. Don't worry, of Absolute Power 4, the wrap up. But also, I loved in that, and also in your one shot or the tie-in with 15, that Wally and Airwave call Hal Uncle Hal, and I'm like, and at first when I saw him in your issue, Wally and Hal, I'm like, is that Airwave? I'm like, oh no, that's Wally, and I'm like, of course he's Uncle Hal, because Uncle Barry, it's like a family friend that you've always called Uncle.
Totally.
That's great, man. That is awesome. It is those little nods that it's like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy gets it.
That is my favorite thing. Like, there's tons of characters and stuff that people aren't using that I'm just like, great, I'll use if they let me use them. And I'm always a callback, nut and Easter eggs. And when they started talking about Absolute Power, this is the thing. Like, I met Mark because I lived in Santa Monica up until last year for like 14 years. And I was on Twitter and I saw that he was at the comic book store, and I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go. And I like ran out the door, grabbed my keys, zoomed down to the comic book store, and I said, hi, Mr. Wade. My name's Jeremy. I write the Flash now. And he was just so effusive, and he's just like, oh, I really love what you're doing. And we've had a couple lunches and stuff. And as a fan, I'm like, this is incredible. And so when we were talking about Absolute Power, when they were talking about what they were doing, and they asked me to tie in, and I just was like, can Hal steal the bat plane? Like, Steve, and they were like, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, great. And then of course there's some different things I have to move through to be able to do stuff like that. But, but getting notes, I'll send Mark, I send him a list of like, can I use these weapons? Or how about these weapons? And Mark comes back with even more obscure weapons, and it's like his encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And it's awesome. And so like him using Airwave, because I remember I didn't even know really who Airwave was. I'll be honest. I was like, I don't know who this is.
Hey, Jeremy, that's fine, man. You're younger. You're a lot younger, and it's okay. So no, absolutely, man.
But see, I think what people online are starting to figure out about me is they'll mention people to me, and it will send me down a rabbit hole. And unfortunately, that means I probably earmark it. Like if I stay on a book long enough, all those people will show up. But yeah, seeing Airwave and just seeing Mark Waid do his magic is always a fascinating thing. But for me, it's interesting because this is the second tie-in I've had to do with my book. I had to do this thing called Night Terrors. What is it in the chat? You tell me.
I know what you mean. I remember. Yeah. It's 2 years or so ago. Yeah.
It was right after my second issue, and I had fun doing it. And like I said, Mikey likes it. I'm never gonna throw a fit. I don't want them to kick me out. Are you kidding me? Like, Night Terrors, yeah. And I'm just like, yeah, awesome. Like, what am I gonna do? Say no? this is the dream, writing comics. You know what I mean? Oh, that's very kind. But I also know as a fan, like if I'm reading a comic, it needs to service the story that I'm reading, so that if you're a fan of the book, you're not feeling, you know, ripped off, but also get you interested in what is happening in the event, you know, of some sort. And a lot of the stuff that's coming out of it, the Absolute Power, the Amazo robot named Jadestone is going to stick around the Lantern books for a long time. And,
Fun.
Fun. I think some really neat stuff are gonna come out of that.
That's really cool. And Lego Monster says what you're talking about with Hal stealing the plane. Also, those villain weapons are my favorite parts of the Green Lantern issue. Watching Hal use Condiment King's guns was cool to see. Absolutely. And here, Kaboom. By the way, my favorite breakfast cereal growing up, Kaboom. The Night Terrors tie-in was really good. I usually skip tie-ins, but damn, those issues were good. Yeah, man. Is it hard to massage in a tie-in when you're telling a longer story and everything?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. Especially with Green Lantern, like I was 2 issues in, and then to me, it feels like an improv game. It's like, well, how can I make this good? Like I'm always starting from a position. I'll give you an example. Like in the Flash, I wanted to use Ted Kord, and they said you can't use Ted Kord because I'm a huge Ted Kord nut. And they said you can use whoever else. And I said they mentioned Mr. Terrific. I was like, oh, he's so Vulcan. I don't know if I want to use him. And then I thought, but how could you make him so you would like him? How would you write him that you like him? And then I was like, what if Mr. Terrific was Buckaroo Banzai? And then I suddenly started like making a list of all the companies that Mr. Terrific, I have this massive list of like, he has a potato chip company and a streaming service and like all this stuff to feed into his labs. And I was like, now I freaking love this guy, you know? And so even with Night Terrors, it was kind of like, okay, the whole thing was like, oh, it preys on the fears of the heroes. And I'm like, yeah, it's Hal Jordan.
What? The Man Without Fear.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was like, well, that is where I started from. And so if you read it, the first issue is very much this alien trying to grab hold of what his fear is. And then the second issue is him going like, yeah, you came to the wrong planet. And it's just 22 pages of Hal Jordan kicking this thing's ass from page 1 to page 22, you know? It's so crazy that they let me kind of like get away with it, you know? So I was laughing my head off. It was really, really, really fun.
That's great. For the video audience, and again, we do video and audio here at Word Balloon. I'm going to zoom in on Jeremy's background because I hope people are noticing that the Hall of Justice.
Yes, mine from a Christmas. It was one of my best Christmases ever. And my kids love it too. They love all the supercars.
Oh my God. Absolutely.
It's the best. It's the best Batmobile. I'm not going to lie, man.
Oh, wait a minute. All right, let's zoom in.
Like you got the lights, right?
But like, the 66 design. Well, that's actually looks more like the animated. That looks more like the animated 70s Batmobile. Yeah.
I mean, it was. Wow. This was the coolest, dude. This was the coolest to me.
That's great, man. God, have you been down to Cincinnati and seen that museum that is the inspiration?
No.
Oh man, seriously, you got to do that one year. And go. You know, Cincinnati Comic Con, or Comic Expo. I went for Tony's Cincy Comic Con many years, and we would just get like literally like 24 people in a bus, and we drive to that, you know, and all posed in front of the building. And meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice, you know,
are they filming it? That's in the new Superman movie. I think they filmed there too, right? Like they filmed it for the Hall of Justice for the new Superman movie. I think.
Oh, I hope so. God, I certainly hope so. That would be amazing, and it wouldn't surprise me given the level of fan that James, you know, Gunn is and everything. I hear Stephen has a question. When you write Ted Kord, can you tie up the end of the '80s Blue Beetle series? What happened? I don't remember that. What happened?
The Green series? I'm trying to remember because he's been in and out of everything for a long time. And in fact, I remember. Oh man, I told Jeff. I'm sorry, I cut my lip earlier, and it's just like bleeding. When I met Jeff Johns, I told him that he wrote one of the best Blue Beetle stories that ended with him getting his head blown off. I was so mad, Max Lord,
yeah,
Lord, and I was so mad. But then he kind of redeemed himself because him and this other guy, they did the Booster Gold series, and they kind of brought him back. And I'm such a nutty continuity guy. That,
dude, I have always been fascinated by Dan Garrett, the original Blue Beetle. Yeah. And I know, and in fact, I just had a comic historian on, Chris Irving, talking about how messed up his whole continuity was, going back to Fox Comics of the 40s through the Charlton years, and then even ultimately DC. Yep. And I was so glad, and forgive me, my brain is on senile mode, and I can't remember the current Jaime writer or the
Reyes. Yeah,
Reyes, yeah. And we were talking about, and I'm so glad that he incorporated Dan and Ted in Jaime stories. And it's like, that's the thing, man. I'm like, no, there's a real legacy. By the way, for GL15, the variants are amazing, and and of course Nicola Scott, and does her classic. All right, here's every iteration of how she's done them over the years: Nightwing, Wonder Woman, etc. And it was so great to see the Lanterns, and it's really great. So
she was selling the original. We were in Chicago, I think, and I went over and looked, and I was like, maybe I'll buy this, And then I looked and I was like, no, I will not. There's the same thing. Like Mitch Gerrits did that with one of the Flashpoint Beyond covers. And I just kept staring at it. And I'm like, Mitch, is there a discount? I was like, oh, and then I was like, really, like, I'm going to buy this. And
were you in Fan Expo Chicago in August?
I was. Yeah.
Oh man. Cause you see, and listen, I love Terrificon. Everybody that watches and listens to Word Balloon knows my association with Terrificon, and I love it to death. But truly, man, it's so funny because the prior year there were friends, and it was finally my chance to really have a face-to-face with Frank Miller and Selene Thomas, his producer, and they were great. And so I'm glad I went. But I really was kind of done with my business by like Friday afternoon. I really didn't need to go to the rest of the show. And this year it's like, and some people weren't able to show up. Like I know all of Jeff's guys at Ghost Machine didn't end up showing up. Yeah. But I'm like, oh man, a lot of my friends are going to be there, and other people that I can meet for the first time. And I'm going to be in Connecticut. I don't regret a minute of it because I got to do 2 amazing Star Trek panels, and that made me very happy. And all the comic book stuff. I had Jason and Snyder on to talk about the Absolute books. And they were great. And so, if you haven't listened to those episodes, everybody.
I did. Yeah. And
God bless you, Jeremy.
And in Chicago, I had only been there once previously, like 10 years ago.
Okay.
And this time I took the train down and took an architectural tour of Chicago.
Oh, sure.
And everybody was the nicest human beings on earth. I had the best time. And it was a busy con. I was very surprised. Because sometimes I'll go to some different conventions. The only reason people started asking me to go, and I would be like, yeah, because I started during COVID. So I never got to meet people. And it's been a great chance for me to just kind of like meet other creators and talk to them about the business and see what's going on and get advice, and
absolutely
bug them about my favorite thing they've done,
That's great, man. What's going on with you in Green Lantern? Are you leaving?
Nope.
Okay,
I was worried about it myself. But
so what's coming up without spoiling?
So without spoiling, Green Lantern is. Can you tell us about your plans with the Sad Lantern? They're big plans with Sorrow, which is funny. I've gotten such mixed reactions about this character, and it really has to do with kind of the splintering of the emotional spectrum in a way. And his arc is very much, I wanted to make somebody for Carol that was very much what Carol was for Hal. When Carol became Star Sapphire back in, the Golden Age, or Silver Age, pardon me.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, that's right.
She was kind of uncontrolled, and kind of crazy, obviously.
Absolutely.
And they explain it away with the Predator and all sorts of stuff later on. But for me, I wanted to add a character like that for Carol. But then it's kind of morphed into something else. And Nathan is going to be a really big part and also just kind of indicator of some of the stuff that's going on with the Spectrum. He won't be the last new emotional offshoot.
Okay.
Fracture of the emotional spectrum that's going to show up. So what I can tell you is that I've been telling the story about the United Planets and Lord Premier Theros, and you see Kyle is messed up because the emotional spectrum's messed up, and they've blown up all the central power batteries. There's a source lantern on Oa that was left from Jeff Thorne's run. John Stewart had made this source lantern, and it's kind of become a bit of a headache for everybody. And so that arc, this Civil Corps special is going to happen. And then I think it's about 3 issues before there's somewhat of a, I won't say a reset, but it's till we start going into the next arc of Green Lantern. And everything will have changed to a degree. Not in a bad way. A lot of things will remain the same, because to me, Green Lantern is about being space cops. And I think it'll be more like their space U.S. Marshals, like there's going to be a little difference to it, but it'll be really, really cool. Man, I feel so terrible. I got this cut, and it's just like bleeding.
Oh, well, I'm not zooming in anymore, so I won't. Don't worry about
it's
that.
Just like I got a little goatee or something.
No, that's the worst. Hey, I've never had liquid death. What does it taste like?
It's just water.
It is just water. Okay.
This one tastes. This is like I just picked it up the other day because I'm always trying to cut my Red Bull habit, which I have. I drink way too much. And this has a little cranberry taste to it.
Okay.
So it's fine. It gives the illusion of health, but it does have this kind of like EC, like death. My daughters are like, What are you drinking, Dad? I'm like, it's just water, kids. I promise.
Well, I'm a big Spindrift fan.
Oh, yeah.
And because I was a really guzzler of, what do you mean? What's the problem with having 5 Cokes a day?
Yeah.
And then my weight line expanded, and it's like, all right. And I love Spindrift because a lot of the hint is literally what it is called, and it's like not enough flavor. I need more flavor, and that's why I love Spindrift. And I don't need sugar; I just want flavor.
Same.
And my God, most of their different variations of fruit, I'm like, these are amazing. I'm sure they mix well with booze as well.
I'm sure, yeah.
But I'm clean. I don't drink it. It's all. And again, I live in a state where it's legal. It's all marijuana or nothing for me.
That's hilarious. I'm the biggest square. Like even in college, people make fun of me. I come from a long line of addicts. So here's the weird little tidbit is I've never had alcohol, and which makes most comic people scratch their head. So it's just one of those things where I'm like, yeah, but my school, I went to University of Arizona, and we were 40 minutes to Mexico. So guess who's the guy that gets you across the border and back from the border? Like me.
That's great. And listen, man, I'm not going to name names, but I know a lot of people that drank way too much after hours at BarCon.
Oh yeah.
And especially in the environment that we are currently in as a society. And you got to have a square head. And honestly, another thing was, and I would drink a little bit at cons, but doing panels by Sunday, I would roach my voice.
Oh yeah.
Now we're doing the thing. And it's like, can't do that. And especially when I was active in radio doing a convention, and then like, hey, I got to go to work on Monday or Tuesday, and I need to have my voice, man. I can't be anyway. So yeah, I understand. Pumpkin Time, and please feel free to expand more on this. Wants to know if we've talked yet about Green Lantern Civil War. Only a little bit. Loves Philip Kennedy Johnson's War Journal, and super curious to see the two of you collide. Well, I've also Philip and I have talked about War Journal, but I've loved the backups that have been happening in GL too. So
yeah, and Philip is like, the way that he writes is so mythic and so world building, and he's such a deep, they're like him and Tom King, like they just have this deep like depth to their writing.
Yes,
I'm much more Fast and Furious 6. So my goal is like the kind of Richard Donner Lethal Weapon vein is kind of where I want to be.
Good.
And it was really unique with Philip because he brought such gravitas to so many of the scenes, but he's also established some really interesting pieces of John Stewart's like lore. He's got like kind of the soul of his mother in this ring, and he's got this sentient construct named Ellie running around. And so I think I stumbled upon some really cool ways of integrating that in a really fun way into it's a Hal book, but like a lot of books I write right now, it's like it starts very singular and then it starts getting bigger and bigger. And that happened with The Flash too. As I start getting used to a voice, it's like, okay, now I want to know more about Linda. And now I want to know about the kids. And now I'm going to do 1 Minute War and everybody's going to be in it. And so it feels like that, where we get to bring in a lot of the different Lanterns, because Green Lantern at one time was just like the biggest selling book at DC. And that's when I was reading. I was reading when Jeff Johns and Tomasi, right? So like Tomasi was doing Green Lantern Corps and Jeff was doing Green Lantern, and it was so stinking fun. And it's so big and it's so wide. And my goal for any of these things, even when I was doing The Flash, is like, I want to get people so excited about it that there is a profit motive to do more books. You know, there should be a Green Lantern Corps book. There should be, you know, a Green Lantern Quarterly book. You know, like I want to see much more than we have time for. There's too many characters that I'm like, well, what about this character? What about this character? You know, and I get a look of no, or whatever. You know, I have a dream project that I keep pitching every once in a while, and I always get this like, yeah, no, Jeremy. And I'm just like, someday Jeremy will be profit. Like if my book sold enough, they wouldn't be able to say no. You know.
Do you have any Black Label ideas? I mean, your stuff, I think, like you said, hyper action, but there is also a lot of characterization going on. And I'm so glad you mentioned what's happening with Carol and her connection to Sorrow and everything, because really, I think that's an emotional beat that I really appreciate in what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, and it's kind of blossomed because as we talked, like obviously the solicits are out and spoilers if you don't want to know, but Carol becomes an integral part of the Justice League, and that was kind of a conversation that Paul, my editor, and Mark and I were talking about. And listen, I have 2 daughters. One of my biggest joys in life is being able to write things that they can look at, or also write things that that they can read, you know, and other heroes. And I think Carol's been around a long enough time, and she's been through enough that I think that she could be elevated to a bigger status as a character 100%. That exists outside of Hal Jordan, you know?
Absolutely.
And I feel that way with a couple characters. I you know, listen, I was never a Power Girl fan until Paul Miati Gray and Amanda Conner were writing that series, and I was such a nut for it. And I'm a sucker for Amanda Conner's art too. Like,
she's amazing.
Her and McGuire have this expressiveness that I just can't get enough of.
Oh yeah, that's good. You know, that's good, man, because they have different art styles. But you're absolutely right. It is their facial things. What I loved about the Power Girl run, and I always bring it up, and I always give. I mean, thank God, Jimmy and Amanda are always great to me as well. Good Lord, they introduced me to Joe Kubert before he passed away, and that meant so much to me. But truly, like, Amanda always hugs me, and I always call her the girl next door. I'm like, it's the girl next door. There she is. But when they were doing Power Girl, and she was having a conversation with Jimmy Olsen, and I'm sorry, folks, I hope this isn't misogyny humor, but I found it funny. And she's like, wow, he's really connecting with me. And he's just keeping eye contact. And now there go his eyes, and he's looking at me. And it's like, yeah, man. Because even the great Keith Giffen, I got to do one interview on the phone with him before he got too curmudgeonly, and it's like, I don't want to do this shit anymore. And he was always nice to me at shows, but really, I understood. But we talked about when he and Wally Wood were introduced Power Girl back in the All-Star Super Squad Squadron days of the early 70s. And he's like, every time DC editorial would complain about Power Girl and her breasts, Wally would draw them bigger.
That's
just to mess with them. It's like, no, I get it, man. And again, that's why I love Amanda. Amanda is great that way. And of course,
they also didn't shy away from it. They didn't they made it, you know, it was such a funny, relatable, but they made her, you know, multidimensional. Like, I cared about her as a character, and it was really
Vartox. Bringing back Vartox and making him pursue her hard.
Oh, I thought that was so great. And you know, that's the same thing with, like, you know, the way, like, Jeff Johns, man, like, he's a deep diver too. Like, that was fun to get in a room with him, and he, you know, we just kind of like, who has more, he has more knowledge, but it's fun to be able to try to like out like, yeah, but Jeff, remember this? And it's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, you know, that's super fun. But all those,
Jared, I refer to myself as the novice amateur, and like
Okay.
Wade and Johns are the chess masters.
They're
But
so-
being as old as I
Wade is
am,
a different level. Wade is a different level. I can tell you though that once I was working for a marketing company out here before I'd broken in anywhere. I think I got like I think I had a Green Lantern credit and maybe something else. But I worked for this company called Full Screen, and my job title was Marvel Specialist. So that was my job. My job was literally they would be doing all these Marvel movies, especially the Fox ones, and I would be on these conference calls because no one knew anything about these. And I would be like, well, in the comic, and I would have to explain, and then they'd give me money. Like I was like, what?
that's fantastic.
How is this? This is crazy, you know?
God, well, and again, I don't want you to leave DC, but I hope one day we might see you at the Marvel Universe doing some
You know,
stuff.
I've done a couple of the digital ones. I've done like 10 little digital ones.
Okay.
And they offered me something, but it just didn't work out, sadly. I would kill to do it. I mean, obviously, I have two speeds. Like, I was definitely a huge Batman nerd. And it wasn't just Batman. It was like Chuck Dixon was running the Bat Office. It was like you had Nightwing and Robin, and then you had Batgirl and Birds of Prey. All of it was like, oh, I followed everything in that category. And
Sure.
he was also like, and it's something that Gail Simone picked up on too. I'm a huge martial art nerd, obviously. So like they would clearly define the martial art universe of DC Comics, which I was really into. But in the Marvel side, I probably have more Marvel than I did DC. And I was I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't paying attention to who wrote things. I was just reading them as a kid. But since going back, it's like, oh, so anything by Mark Grunwald, Fabian Nicieza, I don't know how to say his last name, but like
You said it right. Yeah.
I was complete Captain America No More is when I got into Captain America, and then Peter David obviously in the Hulk run, which was another thing. So speaking of, like, we're all over the place. People just deal
I love
with
it.
So
I love
Jim Krieg and I, we had done Scooby Natural, and this is my Peter David story. And so we done Scooby Natural, and we got invited to some supernatural thing at Comic-Con. And so it was like a cocktail hour. We're like, sure, we're gonna ride this into the sun. Like, this will be great. So we get there, and people are really nice. And then this, like, smaller guy with a little toque on his head comes up and goes, "Hey, are you guys writers?" And we're like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'm a writer too." And we both go, "Sure." And then he goes, "My name's Peter David." And like Scooby-Doo, we both go, "Peter David." And then the whole thing was over. We are like, "We're getting you a drink." We sat him down, and we just tried to, he wanted to talk supernatural. And we're like, yeah. Okay, so anyways, when you did Trancers 4, like, explain to me. Like, you saw that? I'm like, I saw all full moon videos, And then it was like, and then it was like an X Factor. When you did that thing with Madrox and of course, obviously the Hulk stuff. So Grunwald's Captain America is happening. The Armor Wars is happening with Tony Stark. And then with Peter David stuff, Joe Fick, the Gray Hulk had just been, I remember picking up the issue, and it was like the Green Hulk was back, and we're inside his brain. I remember thinking, I don't know who wrote this, but this is the greatest thing I've ever read. And it was like the Gray Hulk's pushing this golden wall inside Bruce Banner's mind, and the Green Hulk's trying to get out, and the Gray Hulk goes, "Is that Lou Ferrigno?" And the Green Hulk turns around and he shuts the door, and I go, "I'm in." And I didn't stop reading that until Peter David left, and I loved it. And he is the GOAT, as somebody said, because I was
Pumpkin Time just said that. Yeah,
I read Imzadi, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy, all the Star Trek stuff.
Yes, when I met him, my only time meeting him face to face, and we did an interview for a guy that was looking for someone to interview him for a video that he was making. And once we were done, I'm like, all right, dude, you got to tell me about your Star Trek novels, because that's what I love. And Max Collins is like this as well. And even, I don't know if you've ever done this at San Diego, but they have a special panel for adapted material,
Really?
and they hand out awards.
Oh,
And I actually went. Marv was there, Wolfman,
oh,
and Max Collins is usually there when he's in San Diego, and John Mayberry was there,
oh.
and all these guys that will take established things from television or film and make novelizations,
Oh.
original stories based on these things. And they're, oh my God, these people, men and women, they're brilliant at adapting.
It's one of my dreams. It's like, I want to do like a Star Wars novel or like I'm a D&D novel. Like, so I was a huge D&D nerd for the Forgotten Realms books, the R.A. Salvatore books, but the Dragonlance Chronicle books by Weiss and Hickman. Anyways, there was this moment, I remember being in Supernatural, and this person was talking about how they had read War and Peace for the second time. And I said, the difference between you and my eye is so vast. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I go, I've never read War and Peace, but I've read 26 books about a dark elf named Drizzt Do'Urden. Like, you know, and in my head, I was like, that's the dream. I want to do a Star Wars novel. I want to do a D&D novel. I would kill. And during COVID, I wrote a book, and I was like, I don't know if I could ever publish it. It's probably terrible, but you know, yeah. Anyways, I see Steve says New Warriors and Quasar were, yeah, Quasar was huge for me. New Warriors was really big for me. That was a great. I read that straight through, and I'm kind of a Ditko nut. I didn't realize it.
Oh
either.
wow!
But like my dad had given me, I probably still have it. I'm sure I do. Oh, here it is. My dad had given me a pocket Doctor Strange.
Sure.
Kid, and it's, you know, it's a Ditko.
Oh yeah.
It's so crazy and weird, and I was like, this is awesome. And then the first book I picked up was a Charlton Blue Beetle. That's why my love of Ted Kord kind of came into play. And then suddenly I was like, oh, this Question's awesome, and Speedball's awesome. And he just kind of, something about the design and the way that he did it was really, really cool. And I always put him in my head. He was always kind of tops in a lot of ways, especially the old guard. I had him way above Kirby, which is like sacrilegious to a lot of people.
No, that's same, man.
But I just picked up an OMAC and I read that and I was like, that's really good. That
Interesting.
was really good. Yeah, it was really good. So,
you know, yeah, those guys really. I mean, we cannot downplay their role. And
No.
I mean, you know, it's funny. Right now, I've been a Stan defender because listen, I know I bought, or I should say, as a Christmas, one of my best Christmases was when I got Origins of Marvel Comics and Son of Origins.
Yeah.
So I get it, and I know that there's a lot of fiction in there.
Yeah.
But it's funny right now in Chicago, and in fact, the great from animation and comics Heath Corson.
Yeah.
And he's seeing this play that is part of a trilogy of plays that this local playwright wrote. His first play was about Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Wow. His second play was about Bill Gaines and basically the way the comic industry turned on him during the whole Wortham scare. And it's really about Wortham and Bill Gaines. And then this final play is about Stan and Jack. And it's very evenly handed. And absolutely acknowledges that Jack was screwed and should have gotten a lot more of his original art, but also is like, you know, as we all, those of us in the know realize, Stan was running the company, but he didn't own the company. That was his Uncle Martin.
Right.
And Martin was a hard ass. And then Cadence bought Marvel when they did, and they were hard asses. So, maybe Stan could have made a plea for Kirby, but he did. At least we knew who Steve Ditko and Kirby were.
Right.
And Stan didn't have to do that, but he did.
Yeah, you know, it's so weird. I've heard people talk both sides of it, and all I know is just having been in this industry for so long, there is a certain amount of like when you're I should just say from my point of view, I get mad about it too, in terms of like, yeah, it sucks. The way of the world sucks. You create a character, someone pays you for the character, but you don't get to own the character. The one time I've ever met Dwayne McDuffie, the great Dwayne McDuffie, we had an argument about this.
Interesting.
And he was very nice about it. It wasn't like a mean argument. It was just like, I was a young pup. I was at this animation thing, and here's this guy who's very articulate about things of the business. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he was genius Dwayne McDuffie. And then we ended up talking about music afterwards. It was great. But he was saying that like he had a European point of view, which is in Europe, if you're the guy who wrote or created the Daleks for Doctor Who, they have to get permission to use it every time, and they have to pay you for it. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense because the company is paying you just to do it. And so I'd argue at the time I was taking the company side. Now, having been on the other side of it, it's like, man, I do think it would incentivize creators to make more if we got more ownership. And I think that's a huge reason that some of the best talent in comic books have left the big two, because they're like, hey, why give you my ideas when I can put them out there and make money,
100%, man. No, I completely agree.
So, but with what's weird about Stan Lee for me is I can hear that voice clear. He was the voice at the beginning of Spider-Man and the Amazing Friends and the Incredible Hulk animated things. Hello, true believer. Like, you knew it was like Stan's soapbox. And I'm very much in this mindset of I want for anybody that's kind of a hero that's touched my life in some way, I want to be able to say thank you before they pass away. And like a couple, maybe like a year before he passed away, I paid. I waited in line to get a picture with him because I'd always hoped I would like somehow work with him in some fashion,
Sure.
And that's how that interaction. But I was like, I time's running out. I need to just shake his hand and say thank you, because maybe he didn't do a lot, but to me, he was the voice of Marvel. He was the one that got me. It was like a safe voice to get to do it,
Think of all the other comic publishers of the 1960s.
Yeah.
Tower and all these other things. And Stan, I heard Will Eisner in an interview say this when he and Jack Kirby were doing a conversation that became part of that Dark Horse Book Shop Talk where they transcribed them, and they were in the Spirit magazine as well. But to really hear him talk about it, and he's like, Stan was a promoter, and that is important. Yeah. And the Marvel brand became the thing that it is because of Stan's marketing. So quibble all you want about his specific contributions to specific issues or runs of Ditko's or Romita Sr. or Jack and everything else. But the guy was the megaphone for Marvel and got everybody excited at the dawn of the Silver Age, and it resonates today. And even in the fallow periods of the 90s, Stan Lee was important. So I get it. I agree with you.
Like I said, you need a flim flam man. You need the guy, He's selling
fucking Flashman, as you know from your new guy.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And you know what I love? You should do one of these. Have you and Mark and whoever else kind of unpacked the Stan, Jack of it all? But that would be good. And get Brevoort, a guy like Brevoort. Get Brevoort. I love Tom. I love Tom. Because I bet they have opinions about it. I wonder if they would.
Well, good Lord, when Roy Thomas is like, hey, I co-created Wolverine, and it's like, kind of. Oh. And Mark came on, and we had a very good conversation about that.
I mean, but I think what's so uncouth about it is you waited till somebody passed and then you did it.
Honestly, Jer, I think, and I'm not going to name the guy's name, and people might know who I'm talking about, but Roy has a guy that gets him his convention gigs these days because, Roy's an older man and stuff. Yeah. And in fairness, there is evidence that Roy has kind of made this claim going back to the original creation of Wolverine, and in Comics Journal and other print magazines, he's very much telling the same story that he's telling now. But I believe this guy that promotes Roy was the guy that really is like, oh, no, he deserves money. And it is, again, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I respect the hell out of Roy's output. He created so many important characters for both Marvel and then DC. Right. But all that said, like you said, he did kind of wait till there was no one to argue or whatever. And while he is not getting a direct check from the movie side of the business, he is getting a lot of opportunities as the last man standing to do a big signing for a company like, Dynamic Forces. And, here we got a special Wolverine litho, and here's Roy Thomas as one of the co-creators signing it. So he is still making money from that claim. And so I really am of two minds. I wasn't there, and I do know. I mean, I did a panel with him at Terrificon a couple of years prior to the current deal. And he made the point very clearly. He's like, oh, no, I came up with this character, and this is what I thought. And it's like, I mean, it's what Ditko used to say about co-creation of Spider-Man, where he's like, yeah, it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to actually put that idea on paper. And that's what Steve always said about Stan and Spider-Man. And it's like, yeah, man, you needed Ditko. And even though Kirby did that first cover of Amazing Fantasy 15, yeah, man, the sizzle was Ditko and that story and everything, and the subsequent stories afterwards. No, again, there are shades of gray. Yeah. I don't know, and maybe you've explored this as well. And this is another thing to talk about with Wade, maybe, and even maybe Jeff, who created the Barry Allen Flash. Oh, because John Broome, Carmine Infantino, a lot of people, Julie Schwartz, they were all involved and making Showcase 4 and making this new Flash. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. And they're all gone,
And, so much of it comes down to money. And it comes down to that comic books is a very low-paying job that kind of has an outsized cultural impact in a way, even though it's kind of a niche thing. And I feel like if people were, Tim Sheridan and I talk about this all the time. We say that, like, in film and television or whatever, it's like we get notes, and sometimes they'll be egregious, and sometimes they'll be mean, and sometimes it's like, but we're paid for them well, so like, give us the notes, and other things that are lower paying, like sometimes I'll be like, I don't know if you're paying enough to get that note, right? It's such a funny thing. But, I also try to cultivate an attitude of gratitude, because it's definitely, like I said, this is something I've always wanted to do. It's provided me with a huge opportunity to add toys to the toy box. That's been one of my incredible joys, is being able to like create characters and add to the mythology. And if, oh gosh, like I'm, like I said, I'm a continuity nut. I had this entire plan to fix so much like garbage continuity. Like that was a coloring mistake. I'm like, I need to fix it in continuity. Like that's how much of a, like, there's so many like weird, because DC, especially DC's universe is like an Etch-a-Sketch that's just got, okay, we'll shake it up, start over, and so continuity gets a little wacky. That's why when I took over Flash, they had told me, they had said that everything that had happened had happened. It was kind of a leftover from the 5G. And so, yeah, in my mind, to make that make sense, I was like, oh, of course, Wally is connected to the Speed Force. The Speed Force goes throughout all the universes, and the Speed Force is, because he's connected, because he was on Metron's chair during this time, he is probably the only being that remembers every continuity shift. And in my head, I was like, this is awesome, because now he's super OP, right? Like he's super overpowered, and he's even more. I think it was hard to get my mind around how do you write Wally. And I just kept thinking, like, I just want to do Doctor Who. And I kept thinking, like, he's faster than time. Like, he can beat anybody. If force is mass times acceleration and you have infinite acceleration, he's more powerful than anybody. And then you realize his weakness is empathy. And it's not a weakness, but it's a strength as well. It's with the rogues, it's with anybody. He slows down to connect or slows down to help. And that's when he gets in trouble. But I love the idea that Wally, who's been through so much abuse, has infinite empathy and was able to come out the other side and have this whole life. And I think it's a really good message too, because I think even the first, it wasn't the first issue, but when I got to my Heroes in Crisis issue, there's this great saying from AA, which is don't leave before the miracle happens. And I purposely put that in there because I think it's a very important message for people that are dealing with depression or whatever. It's like, don't leave, don't give up before the good thing happens. And the good thing, if you stick around long enough, the good thing will happen. Is kind of how I wanted to play that. But I don't even know what we were talking about. I just went off.
I love
Flash.
Jared, this is great. No, honestly, this is really great. I got to ask you, being a Doctor Who fan, who's your favorite Doctor?
So, Tom Baker, but David Tennant really is. It's really hard. So
there really is two eras. There's what started with Eccleston in the modern era, and there's the classic stuff. And I'm really glad it is kind of partitioned that way.
Right.
And again, I listen. I don't know if you know the old Spencer Tracy movie Boys Town, where he's Father Flanagan, and the motto is "There's no such thing as a bad boy." Like, there's no such thing as a bad Doctor Who. I am so happy for Colin Baker, Doctor Six, how he got redeemed with those Big Finish audios. Yeah, and he's so great on it.
And you know what's funny is I haven't even listened to any of the Tom Baker Big Finish ones, which
they're amazing.
Need to.
They're great.
Because when I moved to LA, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with all these guys that wrote these Dungeons and Dragons modules, and I heard this amazing story about this guy named John Frank Rosenblum, I think his name is, and he was the guy that had licensed Doctor Who at the age of 10 years old in America, and it's the reason there was a fanzine and it was on PBS. It's the best story ever.
Wow.
And now
I never heard this. Go on.
It's an incredible story. And he told me the story, and I was just like, what? But I only knew of Tom Baker because it was on PBS, and that was the time, and you had K9 and all that stuff.
Yes.
And then when the Eccleston reboot happened, this is literally, I don't know if you've heard this religious story, but so this is how I got my first credit. Is this guy I knew was like, hey, me and some friends are meeting for a Doctor Who night, and I said okay, and I'm mildly interested in Doctor Who. I like Tom Baker, and they would get bootlegs at Eccleston's for when they'd come out, and we'd watch them, and we'd watch them once a month, and we'd all get together. And at the time, there was this guy named Jim Krieg, and I'm like, who's Jim Krieg? And Jim's like, what do you want to do? And I go, well, I want to be a writer. And he's like, I'm a writer. I'm like, yeah, sure you are. And he goes, let me read something of yours. And so I gave him one of my scripts, and I remember him going like, this is crap, but like the good kind of crap. I'm like, oh, thanks. Cut to probably 6 months to a year later or something. And I'd gone to this church out here where there was a sermon about the burning bush. And I'm like, man, I have been out in LA for 10 years, over 10 years. I couldn't get arrested, couldn't get a job. And my wife's like, you should pray about it. I was like, I prayed about it. Shut up. But I did. And the next day I get a call from Jim. And he goes, I know this is super weird, but I feel like God wants me to be your mentor, and I want to put you on this show called Green Lantern, the animated series. But I need you to do these 3 things. And then he had 3 tasks for me to do, which I found out years later. He told me he did that because he just wanted to see if I was serious. He just wanted to see if it was like legit.
Interesting.
But I always fall back to like Doctor Who is a huge part of how I got my first job in animation. And the Eccleston stuff is amazing. The Tennant stuff, there's so much charisma. And the love story with him and Rose was just, and the Donna, I just freaking love Donna.
Oh, dude, that last episode, but when before the comeback, which is like, we were supposed to be mates. We were supposed to go all over the place. And it's like, yeah, Donna, I hear you.
I know.
Heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And then this is the thing. And then Matt Smith,
amazing.
That whole first episode.
Yes.
He could have just gone off with that little girl. He could have gone off with the young and
little Amelia, absolutely, before she's Amy, absolutely.
So good. And then the Rory and the love story. And I was like, oh my gosh. Now I will be honest, I fell off after Smith. I fell off. I heard Capaldi's really good.
Capaldi's run is great.
Yeah,
Go
I
on.
heard it's great. I missed, but the other thing is the theme song, the Doctor's theme on Matt Smith's is
Murray Gold's song that's titled "I Am the Doctor."
Yes. So anytime a show would get boring for me, I would play that music. And I would just imagine Matt Smith rolling in. And so we'd be watching Bridgerton, and I'm like, you know, it'd be really great. I'm like, dun, 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 dun. And then I'd be like, because if Matt Smith showed up, this show would get exponentially better right now. It doesn't matter what we'd watch. I would just hit the button, and I'd be like, man, imagine if if Matt Smith showed up.
Well, between The Crown on Netflix and House of Dragons,
House of Dragon.
I mean, it's like I have so much like more. I mean, I loved him as the Doctor.
Yeah.
But my God, he was so great as Prince Philip in those first two seasons of The Crown, and he's killing it on House of Dragons. And it's like, way to go, Matt. And listen, I was rooting for Jodie Whittaker, but I felt she was underserved by the scripts.
Yeah.
And I'm rooting for Ncuti Gatwa, and I'm kind of disappointed in his first season.
Yeah.
And I'm shocked because I think Russell Davies knows what he's doing.
Sure.
I don't know if it's because and listen, man, we don't have to get into it, but the whole DEI thing, and I respect representation. I want inclusion. I want it to happen. But if you are sacrificing character and story because, hey, look, here's a woman. Hey, look, here's a person of color. Hey, look, here's a person of a different orientation. And that's all they represent, and they're just there. That's square in the board game of storytelling. That's square one. You got to finish the board. You got to run the whole thing, man. And if you don't do it,
I hope that's not why they did that. I haven't watched them, so like I said, the Capaldi, because there's a magic, like Tenet. Maybe I like that manic vibe because Tenet was just unbelievably charismatic, and Matt Smith was just crazy, right? I always wanted. You remember the guy who played Ron Weasley? I wanted Rupert Grint.
Sure.
I was like, they always joke about him not being a ginger, and I was like, gosh dang it, they got to do it. They got to just do it. But
yeah, no kidding. You're right.
During a lot of those runs, there's a couple of those episodes to me that there's those gateway drugs. Like Blink, obviously, is one that you can absolutely show anybody. The other one that just breaks my heart is the Van Gogh episode. It's just like, and you have Bill Nighy who's in it, and as the whatever the museum caretaker. But yeah, I hope that's not the case. I always, and it's not for me to say because I see that sometimes with. I'll give you an example. This is going to be controversial. It's like Anthony Mackie as Captain America. As a nerd, I'm annoyed by it. I'll tell you why. Because Bucky to me was like, hey, the Ed Brubaker series is so great. I know what Bucky's arc is, so I'm there. And I hope this is what happens in the new Captain America movie because my biggest problem with him as Captain America is I like the Falcon as Falcon, but
I completely agree. I love Sam Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I need to know why I should care about him because I don't know I don't know anything. They haven't shown I saw Steve Rogers as the skinny kid that got the thing and they mentioned it briefly. Like I would kill. Like if they did a Black Hawk Down with Anthony Mackie in pre Captain America or something, so that like I could see why I should care about this guy. It made me feel so much easier about he's Captain America now, or whatever.
Yes.
I always feel that way because I just need to know. I need to know why I should care about these characters or give me the backstory that's really neat. Otherwise, it's hard to get the audience on board, especially when you have characters that are so beloved and done so well. And if somebody thinks that's racial, whatever. I'm just like, no, I care about story. I care about characters. Like there's a preview for a new Michael B. Jordan movie with that's directed by oh my gosh, what's his name? He did Creed.
Ryan Coogler.
Oh my gosh. I'm not even going to watch the trailer because anything Ryan Coogler does, I'm 100% in the tank for, and I don't want to be spoiled. But I keep thinking like Ryan Coogler, he kills it. I wish that speaking of female directors, Catherine Bigelow, like, please give her something to do in the universe because I freaking love Catherine Bigelow and she could destroy anything that shows up. And
as soon as Terry Matalas was announced for the White Vision series that they're planning, I loved what he did with Part 2 and 3.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, and again, there's a rumor that maybe Alex Kurtzman was let go or walking away from Star Trek. And I know Paramount right now is I don't know because right now there aren't like Variety and Hollywood Reporter aren't reporting this. It's a UK website that nobody has heard from. And it's like, they're the ones that ran it yesterday. And I'm like, I hope it's true. I don't like what he's done with Star Trek.
They're buying, Paramount, right?
Right. Correct.
And I remember when I'm trying to remember what Sony. I remember thinking when Sony, there's some buyout or something, and I remember thinking like, if I had James Bond, I would be putting a James Bond out every year. Like that would be, and Star Trek. It's so funny. It's like first of all, let me just say this right off the bat. I'm pretty much wrong about everything, and my mind can change over the years. And I remember them telling me, I don't know, something about like, oh, they don't want to cannibalize their theatrical experience with certain things. So why would we put them on television shows? I'm like, you're idiots. Put it all on television. Put everything everywhere. Everybody will care. I think they were right. Like I find myself completely bored with Star Wars and completely bored with certain things. And I'm like, is it because it's on TV and it's so readily now it's not an event? Like, I don't know. And
it's gotten ordinary. I agree. It was always an event when there was something new from Star Wars.
Yeah.
And there is too much product. And I agree. And I understood during COVID, and it's certainly, the whole collapse of the movie theater system. And it's so funny because I literally was saying this with former Marvel writer and editor Glenn Greenberg, yesterday. And it's like, hey, movies are back, Barbie. Hey, movies are back, Oppenheimer. And it's like, no, those are outliers. And I mean, again, the way we grew up and looking forward to summer movies and stuff, not really there anymore. And I don't know if it's ever going to come back, frankly.
Well, I mean, listen, the movie going experience is such a painful experience of 40 minutes of trailers, capped by Nicole Kidman, and then, expensive food. And then people being, rude in a theater on their phone, and my wife will glare at them. I'm like, don't glare at them. I'm the one who has to stand. I have to fight for your glare. Stop it, And I always get so crazy. But so Tarantino has a theater. He has 2 theaters out here in Los Angeles. And Jim and I go all the time, and we go to the Los Feliz 3, and we hit all of these old movies. And they, number one, they have a if we see light come from your phone or your wrist, you are banned.
Really?
Like that's it. You're gone.
Good.
Number 2, everybody that is there wants to be there, and it is the best movie-going experience. It is incredibly. You come out feeling exhilarated. You come out excited about movies. You come out excited about storytelling, and it's just too bad that those lessons aren't kind of pulled over into the main other theaters. It feels like to me, because I wouldn't mind if it was easy, if it was just an easy experience to go see a movie, then I would enjoy going to see a movie with other people. But if you're not going to police it, if you're going to let people just act like they're in the living room, why don't I just stay in my living room? Because it's just the way it is.
No, I envy you, LA guys, because you have a lot more theaters like Tarantino's places.
Oh, it's
thankfully
they play one trailer and a cartoon, and then you're off to the races. But even
Tarantino gets it.
Like Star Trek, or I think everybody should. I hate prequels generally because I already know what it's going to go. But I'm always thinking the next generation had it right. Like, let's jump ahead almost 100 years and see what's happening in the universe. I wish there was a Star Wars almost 100 years in the future. I want to see what that universe is like.
And Dark Horse and Marvel did a great, especially Dark Horse. I always give it up to John Ostrander and others that worked at Dark Horse when they had the license, because they were telling stories 100 years later and stuff.
I didn't know that.
Go back and go back and try and get some secondhand copies of. Yeah, there was I want to say his name was Cade Skywalker.
Oh yeah.
And he was a descendant of Luke's, and it's like, and Luke was the Obi-Wan spirit,
that's good.
And it was great because he was kind of rejecting his heritage, and Luke's like, "Hey, you're fucking up, kid. I don't know how to break it to you." And John and Jan Duursema, man, they were a marvelous team for Star Wars during their run at Dark Horse.
Because I read a lot of the extended editions. I read like so many. The Rogue Squadron about Wedge Antilles were just like the coolest books
ever. Sure.
Yeah.
Weren't you bummed that I was so glad that Wedge shows up in Rise of Skywalker? But I'm like, give the guy something to do, because he is still a great actor, and I've seen him on a ton of British TV shows over the years. And it's like, come on, man. And also Billy Dee, man, I got to interview him the summer before Rise of Skywalker, and I know he's getting up there, but it's like, Give him, I mean, all of them. Give them something to do other than just stand there.
I just recently, my daughter came to me and she said, my oldest one, she said, hey, I had shown them both the machete cut, I think, or like I had done, so I didn't want to spoil. I probably showed it to them too young, but the idea of Anakin being Darth Vader is like ubiquitous. They're going to know, they know so quickly. So my daughter said, hey, this time, because they hadn't seen him in a couple of years, she said she didn't remember a lot. She goes, can we watch him in chronological order? I said, oh, absolutely. So we watched 1, 2, 3, and then we watched Solo.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We watched Rogue One, and then we went into 4, 5, 6. It was unbelievably fascinating to watch because my daughter had no idea. Both of them had no idea that Palpatine was the Emperor, that he was Darth Sidious. So it was such a huge turn for them. And even the Anakin turning was it played much better for them than it did for me. Even Jar Jar was a lot better for them than it did.
It's the best of the prequels.
I agree. Yeah. But so we watched Solo. They love Solo.
I like Solo a lot too. I agree.
And then they love Rogue One, and they were like, "This is so sad." And I was like, "Well, that's war, Right. But it seamlessly goes into Episode 4. And what's interesting is that when you get to Empire, my girls were like, "Oh, it's Lando." Like because they had seen Solo, they already they already knew who he was. They were just kind of like, "Oh, we love Lando. Like he's great." They knew who Han Solo was because of the movie. It was like they had a whole new dimension of the way that they perceived the movies versus when I grew up, where it was like, we're guessing years between movies. We're playing with Kenner figures to figure out what the name of these characters are. We have no clue about anything. And now it's like an embarrassment of riches. I always say to people, like, everything that I was beat up for, I'm getting paid for now. It was not always the case. Like you'd say, oh, Star Trek's cool. It's like, yeah, that wasn't something anyone said to me, or anything I liked. It was so marginalized when I was growing up. And it's just such a weird time to live in where this is all kind of the mainstream. Everybody likes it.
Are we cool for time? Because we're doing great. I don't want to keep you for dinner or anything.
Sorry, no, I'm rambling. I tend to ramble.
Jer, again, this is what people watch. This is what people listen to. This is why Word Balloon is different than I think a lot of other shows where I'm happy to go into tangents because this is great, man. No, absolutely. Because I really want to acknowledge what you're doing with Flash Gordon and Mad Cave. And yeah, seriously, man, you and Will Conrad, great team. Oh. And I'm a longtime fan. I mean, as a little kid, they would show the Buster Crab serials every Sunday morning. And I even got to meet Buster Crab at a film revival, which, honestly, man, that and meeting Clayton Moore in the 70s.
Wow.
I'm like, this is why I'm still a superhero fan, because I met the superheroes when I was a little kid.
Oh, my gosh.
And it really, like, Clayton Moore even more so, because I was I was 4 or 5 years old, and there's Clayton Moore, and I'm like, oh, my God, it's the Lone Ranger.
Oh,
and he really was. I mean, he embodied the character. He was very. This is before they took the mask away from him in the late 70s, and he was amazing. And it was And Buster Crab was really cool too. Oh. And it's like, well, I've met these guys. I mean, they were real to me, and in that period. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. I've of course loved the Alex Raymond strips and everything, and even after Alex left the strip in the 50s, and Mac Rayboy, the Captain Marvel Jr. artist, and his run and stuff. So yeah, tell me about researching what you did to kind of get a handle on Flash.
Yeah, so it was such a funny thing. I was pitching my own creator-owned at Mad Cave, and Mike Martz, who has been an editor for that, ever, and he was the first person I ever got to pitch anything to, like 11 years ago. I think I pitched a Batwing to him, and he was like, "No, this guy named Warren Ellis is doing it." I'm like, "Oh, fun," but we retained our friendship, and so he asked me to. I was pitching some creator owned. He goes, "Well, listen, Jeremy, we've also got some licensed stuff. Would you be interested in it?" And at this point, I was doing Green Lantern,
All right. They had been told that I've been doing Green Lantern. And listen, I'm not going to lie. Again, Mikey likes some comic books and also like absolutely paranoid that no one was ever going to let me write a comic book again. And they started going through a list and Flash Gordon. I was like, I do Flash Gordon. And for me, what's interesting about Flash Gordon is my first internship in Hollywood was for this big producer named Dina De Laurentiis, who had done the Flash Gordon movie. And I remember watching that movie and it's being so silly and tongue-in-cheek and fun, and the Queen soundtrack, and everybody knows Flash, everything. But in college, there's these two guys. They're pretty much like, the old guy Muppets. They were pretty much like them. And they were telling me, they're like, you got to get out of some of this new stuff. You got to read some old stuff. And they had turned me on to Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars series. And I went hog wild for John Carter of Mars series. And that began my, kind of like dive into pulp sci-fi. And even working with Bruce, Tim, he would be very much like, you got to read the Parker novels, you got to read the Destroyers. And I would start reading all this stuff. And there was just this element of a time of pulp writing where you didn't have to get the science exactly right. And it was just unrestrained imagination. And Flash Gordon kind of fell into that category. It was like the Buck Rogers Flash Gordon and very much like Farscape, that type of thing. Yeah. And so when they asked me to do it, I said, great. And then for me, I've said this on a couple podcasts, like I am not a deconstructionist. I'm not somebody that is trying to take a character and change what that character is. But what I try to do is just, I had a choice, right? Like, oh, is he a meth addict? And, what's going to make it edgy? And I thought, no, let's just keep the adventure going. Like all those adventures happened and we're going to keep going and let's try to make it fun. And they're serials and they're cliffhangers and it's exactly what they're supposed to be. And I'm going to try to imbue it with as much like weird sci-fi stuff as I can, interesting characters and, all that stuff. And it's interesting working on a license like this because there are weird rules that, King Features will say, hey, we don't want you to do that. And I'm like, oh, how do I do the workaround? Well, some of the workarounds just work. If you just open your mind to the possibilities of it, like the whole thing with Mongo, there was a note saying they didn't really want to say the word Mongo anymore. I was like, what are you talking about? That's the world. And then I think maybe it was misinterpreted or whatever. I said, fine, I'm going to blow it up. And they're like, yeah, you can do that. I was like, are you kidding me? So
wow.
It sparked really cool, like, well, what does that look like if I blow up?
What happens after that? Absolutely. Yes.
And so that was kind of the start of the journey. Now, Will had drawn a couple of great Flash issues that I had done on my first run, and Mad Cave had come to me and said, "Hey, they had given me a couple artists they wanted to use," and I was like, "No, I mean they were very artsy. They're not my thing." And I said, "Well, how about these guys?" And Will was one of them, and they were like, "Well, he's a superhero artist." And I go, "Yeah. Flash Gordon is a superhero," And so they kind of like, okay. And then Will was like, "Oh, Jeremy's doing it 100%." And so we just kind of got together and I was very much like, "Will, what do you want to draw? Like, let me know." I'm so lucky to collaborate with these incredible artists that are really like the DP and director of these things I write.
100%.
I'm always trying to figure out, like, what do you want to draw? Like, what is it that gets you excited? Because the words I would feel so guilty if I handed in a script that like they're bored to draw. You know what I mean? But it's funny because I was mentioning this. It was at a bar. It was after a bar at a con, and Kevin McGuire was there, who I badgered into doing a backup. But I had said something like this. I said, "Oh, I would hate to just, write something where it's just people talking all the time. And I mean, if I was an artist, I'd be so bored." And Kevin's like, "That's all I want to do." And I was like, "Oh, but that's why it's good to ask, what is it you want to do?" And because again, people are going to open it. And if the artist is excited, you can tell. And if they're wanting to do it, you can tell. and it's been a thrill. Fernando Passarin's another one that I've worked with that he and I are simpatico on so many things. Amon K, but Zermanico, and then Will. I mean, they've just been so. And I'm working with these other young guys coming up lately, and it has been a thrill. It's a thrill because I cannot scratch out a stick figure. So when I see this stuff, I'm just like,
oh yeah,
you know.
Is Martz your editor on Flash?
Martz is the editor in chief of Mad.
Right.
This guy named Chase Pagburn is the editor. Really, really, really nice guy. And
okay, because I'm really glad. I don't know where it started. If Mad Cave went to King Features or King Features.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
but really, and I'm so glad that Flash is back because some of the rights holders of the old pulp stuff, they got too precious.
Yeah, they really did.
Now, I mean, people younger than us are like, I've never heard of Doc Savage. I've never heard of the Shadow. I've never, and it's like, these are great characters.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember when they were called Condé Nast. I don't know what they're called.
Yeah.
Street and Smith as well, I think, before Condé Nast. And it's like, you guys fucked up because you got so precious with your intellectual properties that they are now no longer part of the culture.
Yeah,
and
listen,
you have to,
some of the Hanna-Barbera, I'm sad that like people don't know who Thundarr the Barbarian is or what, some of that stuff, because it's like there's some really cool characters out. And by the way, what will happen is, I mean, a lot of these are just going to be public domain. Some of them are public domain, like Tarzan's public domain, I think.
Right, it is.
And
Guy Carter.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, well, if at that point you guys didn't do anything, somebody else is going to do something with it. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of crap before we get a lot of good.
Good, yeah.
AI is. I guarantee you're going to get like a bazillion AI comic books that are going to roll out, and you're going to be like,
But just like you said about an artist being excited about something, I think this goes for writing too, because Azzarello and I talked about this.
Yeah.
And maybe he was just at the end going, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, whatever, that's fine. But I still believe this. We were on a panel with a bunch of other writers a couple years ago at C2E2. And I'm like, there is something about a writer that gets excited about a character and finds a kernel of an idea that AI is not going to pick up on.
Right.
Because,
it goes back to your conversation about having an idea is different than an execute, like doing the thing. Like I live in a town, everybody's got ideas. And I say this all the time. Like I know a dozen better writers than me in my family. The difference is I get to the end. And that's the difference. Is just you actually have to write the thing. I can't tell you how many people I know that have been working on the same screenplay for a decade.
100%, me too, buddy. Absolutely. I have friends like that as well. But my point, here's a great example with, and this is what I told Brian. I'm like, the Superman story you did with Jim Lee for tomorrow.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, and my classic stereotypical Superman story is going back to the George Reeves show.
Yeah.
Crashes through the wall. He stands there. The gangsters shoot at him. The bullets bounce off. He clunks their heads. They go unconscious. He unties Lois and they fly away.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. That the AI understands. What they don't understand, and what Brian put in for tomorrow, was Superman had a crisis of conscience regarding faith. And he went to that priest and had that really interesting conversation.
Right.
And it's like, no, that is something that AI is not going to pick up on.
Right.
And I mean, it would be shock, and maybe eventually it will, but there's a dispassion in an AI execution, whether it is art or story, that right now it's like, hey, I'm sure a bunch of fly-by-night companies are going to absolutely try and shit out AI art and AI stories. And they look comics, oh great, and they're going to go nowhere because there's no passion behind them.
Well, I hope one of the things that I love about comics is that Rob V is very much a part of this. Like
one of my guys, I love Rob V. He's one of my favorite people.
First of all, way too handsome. Let's just put.
I so hear you, man. I know. I'm like, dude, I'm not coming on to you, but it is ridiculous. I'm like, you got the greatest hair.
In the world.
He knows what I'm talking about.
Chill vibe. But one of the things I love about him and the passion he has is something that I'm trying to cultivate. And him just talking about it like gets me amped. Is like he is like, no, this is art. Like he thinks of it much more of art than I do. Like I think of this as fun and pulp and adventure, and I'm not thinking of it that way in a way. And he is, and I really love that, because what he's basically doing is cultivating this kind of artisanal opinion about comic books. And you'll never break away from that. No, people still want handmade chairs. You know what I mean? They
absolutely, yes,
and it's worth more. And there's so many genius people that, not just artists, but the writers that we know and love, that they'll take a character I love and they'll turn it on a dime, and suddenly you'll be like, and I love it even more now. You know, I think Snyder's Absolute Batman, I think, is going to do something like that. I am always impressed when I see Tom King's stuff, because I read it and I go, man, I can't do that. I wish I could do that. There's always, and Frank Miller was always that way, right? It was just like, it seemed like whatever he put his hand to, something changed. And it doesn't mean that you have to be that way. I like all spectrums of writing.
Sure.
You know, like somebody had mentioned Quasar. It's like, I love that. This is worse. I'm into quantity over quality when I was a kid. So, you know, you have an allowance, or I had a paper route. I only had X amount of dollars to spend. We didn't have a comic book store. We had spinner racks and antique stores if we could find it.
Sure.
What I didn't know was that New Universe was absolutely, you know, falling apart. All I did know is I could get 10 books for the price of like one. So do I have every New Universe book? Yes, I do. Do I love every New Universe book? Well, most of them.
You're not a big Kickers Incorporated fan?
Yes. Spitfire. My big one was Cyforce. I really love DP.
Sure.
Night Mask, because my dad's friend, who I grew up knowing, named Tony Solomons, was a co-creator on that. And I was and Cyforce was my big one. And Star Brand was really big, but they all, there's like a moment halfway through when they obviously realized this is all nobody's buying these and we got to shut it down. They went absolutely bananas, and it's weird to read them now because they're so much more mature that I feel like if it happened now, people would be a little better with them. They blew up Pittsburgh. There was the character Justice, who halfway through, you thought he was an alien bounty hunter. Halfway through, no, he was just crazy and had power. Like, just these twists and these. I was as a kid, I was like, this is messed up. And
that was that period of Marvel that, if I'm remembering correctly, where the coloring really was fucked up.
Yeah, it really was.
And it really, I just subconsciously, I'm like, I'm not enjoying this because it's not a pleasurable experience for my eyes as I'm reading. And, you know, I'll even, everybody, I apologize, but 90s Marvel is a tough read for me because of a lot of the inking choices. And also, again, when I was talking to Greenberg yesterday, we were talking about, like, you know, art dominated the story. And it made me check out for several years. I mean, I remember, as I told him, I'm like, The Death of Aunt May that DeMatteis wrote was kind of one of the last things I read. And I'm just like, and all the lenticular covers and the gold covers and all the bullshit. Yeah. I'm like, I want to read a good story. I'm not getting a good story experience. And Mark DeMatteis is a great writer, but the art really dominated those books. And even Glenn agreed as an editor and stuff. And it's like, no, you're right about that. Well, and I'm really glad I have Marvel Unlimited, because it does give me a chance to kind of go back to that period.
Same. And they're great fans. They're you know, but yeah, you're right. And again, that moved into the Image revolution. And as a kid, though, I just ate it all up. Like, I had every Image thing. Anything I get in my hand, everybody has 5 Spawn #1s, I think. You know, and it was like Cyberforce, Youngblood. It didn't matter. I bought it because it was so exciting and new. But
I get it.
Right.
When you're the right age, that stuff hits you. And I absolutely respect everyone who grew up loving 90s comics and Image and all that stuff. I was too old. And I'm just like, you know, again, and also, especially having been in sports radio for 16 years, I'm like, I don't like that comics are being treated like baseball cards or other sports memorabilia.
Right.
And that really bothered me. And it's like, no, man, these are stories. I want to read the story. and that's why when the late 90s happened and Bendis and Brubaker and Rucka and Gail Simone a little bit later and Kelly Sue a little bit later, it's like all these new voices suddenly came in, and it's like, oh, look, they're treating story with respect.
Yeah. Oh my God. The Gotham PD book was so good.
Oh my God. Yes, Gotham Central, truly. I agree. And Mike Lark drawing the goddamn thing. And also, I loved that it was on the old, I'm glad it was on the old news rag.
Yes.
Classic paper.
Yes.
Because it just, and just, it felt more pulpy because of it, you know?
I listen, I'm with you. I have the Marvel Unlimited, the DC Infinite, but because sometimes I just want to go back and read, but it was funny because I made a huge Easter egg for Millennium, and it's not on DC Infinite. So I had to go find the collection of Millennium and reread that, which didn't hold up as good as it did in my mind, because as a kid, I was like, whatever event it was, I was all in. But,
who wrote Millennium again? I forget.
I don't even remember for the life of me, man.
All right, somebody in the chat's going to remember or look it up, hopefully.
But I remember reading it, and like the promise of it was, but I do remember Mark Spector as the Manhunter and some stuff that came out of it I really, really dug. But the ending was so weird. It was like a Guardian and Zamaron are disappeared, and they've made these new Guardians. One looks like a giant sunflower. I was like, what is happening? I was so confused. And I didn't like the look of the characters. They were all dumb. But that's why in Green Lantern, though, that story still spoke to me in some way, that I made Tom Kalamaku come back because he was, and I wanted to bring back Floronic Man because both of them were two of the new Guardians. And the Floronic Man was supposed to be the Guardian, like the one that was controlling the green to cover the new designated survivor Lantern, Steve Englehart.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Englehart. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Jason put it up.
It's
great writer. Great writer.
And it's interesting to go back and read some of these books too, because of the way that, thought balloons don't even work anymore, And my dad gave me. I have the most used copy in the universe of the Dark Phoenix saga.
Okay.
And it is so beaten up and destroyed somewhere behind me. I don't know where it is.
Don't worry about it.
Anyways, it's so. Oh, here it is. You'll see how bad it is.
Okay, no worries.
This is the spine.
Hold on,
that's the spine.
There you go. Well, that's a well-read book, dude.
That cover launched 1,000 imaginations, and but I still read it, and I'm amazed how it's so dense with dialogue, which I also feel like is something that you have to be very careful about trying to get away with.
Regarding thought balloons, because Brian brought him back for a minute when he was writing Avengers. Yeah. And I'm like, and it's funny because I remember when Englehart did his sequel to Laughing Fish and did Dark Detective, and he had thought balloons, and people are like, thought balloons. And it's like, narration boxes are great, and that's a great place to put what's in your mind. But what I liked about a thought balloon was, and I told this to Brian, I'm like, you could have somebody going, hey, nice to meet you, but have a thought balloon of like, I hate this jerk, and I've always hated this jerk, and I got to fake it. And it's like, it'd be interesting to see contrasting thoughts while you project whatever you're really saying.
I think you could, obviously, I think you can do. I think it's sort of like what we were talking about Farscape. It's like, once you get used to the Muppets, you're in love with the Muppets. Like, if that should work,
or Rigel.
Rigel. If thought balloons are in it, you'll acclimate. I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
It's just so funny to see just even the amount of panels. Like, if I get to 6 panels, I start sweating. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to ruin the artist's day, Why aren't balloons used anymore? I honestly, I think it is like somebody started doing thought it was more sophisticated doing the captions, and it smacks of some sort. But you're right.
Again, man, this was the early 2000s.
You know what it is? I'll tell you right now. It's Frank Miller.
Right. He started the
Year One and Dark Knight Returns. They're all captions, right?
Yep. So no, you're absolutely right about that.
Daredevil, Born Again. We're all trying to just hate Frank Miller. Born Again, the Daredevil Born Again series is singular. Like Mazzucchelli's art, it's just so I read it all the time. And I'm
Well,
like,
that's why I mean, and it's been a while, and I don't know what a fresh take from a 20-something is reading a Born Again or whatever. But and again, folks, forgive the old man that's yelling at clouds, but like the rehashed interpretations of Watchmen over the years.
Right.
Well, I just read Watchmen. I don't know what the big deal is. It was distinct and different.
Yeah.
And you got to understand what the product was, the regular everyday product of DC, and the way Watchmen came, and we're all like, holy fuck, what is this?
Right.
And that's exactly what Dark Knight was, the same vibe. And yes, it begat a lot of bad imitations, pale imitations. Right. But it's like, no, you have to understand in the context of the moment, that's why these things are special.
Well,
Kingdom Come, the documentary that's coming out, and right now they're doing the Kickstarter campaign for it and everything. Another great example of, no, you don't understand. This was an event. And in fact, it was one of the first comics to bring me back to comics. I had read Marvels in the early 90s, but when I saw all the posters for Kingdom Come and I saw Alex's art, I'm like, oh, this is going to be something. And then, of course, Mark was right there with an amazing story to support that art. And it's like, I have friends that aren't regular comic book fans, but they own Kingdom Come because they know how special it is.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just like if you watch Psycho now, you're not going to be near as scared. Or Halloween. I mean, Halloween's terrifying, but John Carpenter, I'm a huge John Carpenter nut, and it's like, he's the reason that we had every serial killer movie afterwards like that. But if you've seen that after you've seen that, it doesn't feel as amazing. Though I would be curious about somebody cold reading, Batman Year One or Daredevil Born Again. I would love to know their thoughts because, my goodness, those are singular stories to me.
I absolutely agree. No, man, I'm Frank has yet to be on the show, but Selene assures me that I think when the documentary, I'm thrilled that they made the documentary, but I beat both of them up, and I'm like, listen. Because I am pleased. I don't know if I'm going to wind up in the credits or not, but there's a piece of the documentary. Maybe you've seen it on YouTube. There was that great comic book documentary from the 80s that Harlan Ellison narrated.
Okay.
And they have young Frank Miller, and they've got Eisner, and even Steve Ditko. You don't see him, but you see his voiceover over his art. It's a fantastic. Swamp Thing artist, Bernie Wrightson. They're all in this thing.
Wow.
And Selene saw that I had interviewed the filmmaker who made this in the 80s. Ken Viola was his name.
Okay.
And she's like, hey, John, we love Word Balloon. Frank and I love it. We're trying to get a hold of Ken Viola. You seem to have contact info. We really want to use his footage in this new Frank Miller documentary. Can you help us? I'm like, of course.
Oh, man.
And so I made the connection. And she's like, John, it meant so much. You've really helped us out. I'm like, fine. You and Frank come on a goddamn show.
Yeah.
And let me have my final. I blew it in 2006 when I met Frank right after the Eisners, and I ran out of cards. It was my first San Diego, and he's casual and he's there, and giant, and I'm like 5'8", and I'm like, hey, how you doing? Can you come on my podcast? He's like, sure, give me a card. I'm like, I ran out of cards, and he went, and he walked away. And I reminded, and he goes, and it was great because I hadn't seen him since then in person. And I told him last year at Fan Expo, and I'm like, Frank, we met before. He's like, oh, I remember. I'm like, no, you don't. And let me tell you the story. And I told him, and he got embarrassed. He's like, oh, John, I'm so sorry. I'm like, Frank, I've been dining on that story for almost 20 years. I go, I was completely unprepared. I go, it was a rookie mistake on my part.
Yeah.
You got to be ready when you got that kind of opportunity. Shame on me. And I said, lesson learned. And I said, you know how to make it up to me? Come on, Word Balloon, when Selene says it's cool, and we'll have a nice conversation. Because, I love that guy. I love that guy.
David Pepos is doing Space Ghost right now.
Yes, good run, by the way. He's doing a great job.
Last year, he and I were tabling near each other, and we convinced the people that run the table, like, you got to introduce us to Frank. And so they brought us over, and we got to talk to him for a brief moment, and I was just like delighted. It was just, again, it was back to the thing of just being able to gush over somebody and just go, thank you. You know, thank you,
Yeah.
because we're all chasing you. You know,
100%, man. No, and really, like, I'm very relieved because I know Frank really, like 15 years ago,
yeah,
there was that picture of him and Robert Rodriguez at San Diego or somewhere.
Yeah.
He looked like he was dying.
yeah.
He just really looked
I
anemic.
haven't watched that documentary about him.
It's still playing in festivals, and in fact, I think it might even get nominated for award season coming up next year.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, I check in with Selene, and I'm like, you ready yet? You ready yet?
Right.
And hopefully, but yeah, I don't think you can buy it yet.
Yeah. I want to see it.
So
I wanna see it. Again,
yeah, oh no, it's going to be great.
Singular voice.
I should tease that next Wednesday I'm going to have Jimmy DeMonakis back on the show to talk about the Mignola documentary.
Good.
And that was amazing, and I had him and his co-director on when they were doing their Kickstarter. So it's going to be great to talk to him about that movie now that it's done, and it's out. People can rent it on Apple, and they can rent it on Amazon if they want. So if you haven't seen it yet,
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Jeremy, we've done great. We're over 2 hours.
Oh,
I'm
like, all right, guys, I gabbed a lot again. So
no, it's good, man. No. Again, I try usually, like, if it's the first talk, I'm like, all right, I don't want to burden you, maybe an hour. So I'm so glad that you
no, we got to do it again sometime. I hope,
Oh no, dude, we're all anticipating whatever announcement you have in New York.
Oh, good.
And that's a great excuse to come back on post New York and stuff in a month or so, and we'll do this again. No, man, it's great. No, it's great to meet you, man. And really, I've really enjoyed what you've done. Well, people go back and enjoy, if you haven't already, and I'm sure you have, Jeremy's epic Flash run. How many issues was that, Jeremy?
Let's see, 768 to 800, so 32 plus a couple one-offs and annuals.
Sure.
Wow. Around 36 issues, which
That's
in this day and age is evidently crazy,
100%, man. And killing it on Green Lantern, and more stories to come.
Yep.
And really, everybody, Jeremy and Will Conrad are treating Flash Gordon exactly the way you want him to. And as you pointed out, to whether it was the King Features people or whatever, Flash Gordon is absolutely a superhero,
yes,
and deserves that kind of treatment. And no, it's a fantastic story. Are there just the 0 issue and issue 1 that have been out?
Issue 2 is out. Issue 3 is about to come out. And there's these quarterlies and different books that are kind of around it. Like some of them prequel books, some of them are concurrent with the Flash quarterly book. And they're really blowing out Flash. They've got the Defenders of the Earth, Dan Didio is doing, and they've got a comic strip that's actually there. But mine is just kind of the center point, straightforward Flash story, and it's just going to get more fun and more silly, and Will is he's amazing. So I'm very lucky.
No, I'm with you. And Lewis Southard, I think, was it did at least one of the backups. Maybe in quarterly.
Oh, probably in the quarterly. Yeah, some amazing people are doing quarterly stuff. I've been able to see a lot of the outlines and the scripts when they're done. And again, it's just exploring that universe of Flash Gordon, which if you've never taken part of, there's a reason that you recognize the name. It's reverberated throughout time, so it's worth picking up.
100%. And shame on me. And again, we can do this on the next conversation. You did the Jay Garrick Flash minute?
Yeah.
I loved it, man.
Thank you. That was Jeff Johns came to me and Venditti and Tim and said, okay, Tim, you're doing Alan Scott. And he said, you got a daughter, Jeremy, you're doing this. And he gave Judy Garrick the middle name as my daughter's middle name and same birthday. And it's very sweet. It's very sweet.
That's awesome.
Hey, I have an emotional connection to these characters, John.
Well, I'm happy as hell that Ghost Machine is happening for Jeff.
Oh,
and he's got a lot of great people surrounding him and his ideas, both writers and artists. But yeah, man, when it comes to the Justice Society and those heroes, he really gets it. And it was so funny because I know that he created a lot of the sidekicks from that Stargirl thing. And he was totally messing with my brain. And he's like, John, you don't remember these golden?
That's funny.
John, you know your history. Shame on you. And I'm like, Maybe I fucked up.
Right. He was so convincing. He showed me a mock-up of a Jay Garrick thing, and I was like, but he's very clever, that guy.
I know, man. No, Jeff, much like Mark Miller, Jeff is a guy that I don't check in as often as I do a Bendis or a Rucker or a Fraction or Kelly Sue or whatever. But when we get together, I love that.
I love Kelly Sue's writing. I love Kelly Thompson and I love Kelly Sue. Both of those girls could do no wrong for me.
Well, like you said about Rom, and it was funny as you were describing how great Rom is, I feel like that about Kelly Thompson. Yeah. And I'm just like, all right, here are two relatively new voices.
Yeah.
And it's like, they get it. Rom, I always give it up to him for These Savage Shores because he took pulp tropes and went, instead of the typical ugh native that we got during the pulp era of the 30s through the 50s and stuff, what if we gave agency to the natives and this white vampire is like, hey, I'm going to have a feeding frenzy in Bombay. Maybe not. And maybe the natives are going to turn, and they're not natives. They just got their own different culture. Right. And the same with Kelly Thompson. Everything she's doing. In fact, I saw that obviously she's going to do that Absolute Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
So I definitely
100% there. She has just a quirky. Sometimes she can do a character with a quirky voice that I'm just tickles me pink. You know, I don't know her at all. So she's great. Some characters that I just and writers that I felt like. This last thing I'll say, but like when I did the 1 Minute War, I was looking for a name for the bad guy, and I was reading so much Matt Fraction stuff. I was like, Fraction, yeah, that's the name. That's the name. Like I was like, okay, but there's some of those people that they just have magic in their fingers, man.
I hear you, man. Well, you're one of those guys, and I'm saying it, so don't worry.
Thank you.
Really, man. It is good that the DC universe has your voice, and I'm glad, as you kind of hinted, that you got some creator-owned stuff going on.
I'm trying.
Well, eventually you'll get there, Jared. And again, you're going to bring that DC audience with you, and they're really going to appreciate what you're doing. But no, you're killing it in animation. You're killing it at DC.
Thank you.
Continued success, man. Absolutely. I'm really. It's a pleasure to meet you and finally get to have our first conversation. I know it's the first of many.
Yes.
So thanks for hanging out.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Next week, like I said, everybody, it looks like I'm going to have Chris Robertson on Monday. If people don't know, Chris has been writing the Batwheels Crazy Kids cartoon and has an episode in season 2. So we'll talk to him about that and a few other things. And then, like I said, Demonakis is going to come on Wednesday. And Tuesday, my buddy Michael Kingston, who just writes the best wrestling comics, and they're all original characters, but he is so ingrained in the wrestling community. He really knows what makes wrestling great, modern wrestling. And every now and then I check in with Michael and we have a new conversation. So that's coming up next Tuesday. So that's what I got planned so far for Word Balloon Live next week. So hopefully you'll join us. But until then, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.